on rural development. Rural development councils actually originate from the U.S. Farm Bill, some language in the U.S. Farm Bill that was added in the early 80s. And really the purpose in the creation of rural development councils like VCRD was to integrate rural programs on the federal, state, and local level. The sense was that we had these great federal programs in relation to rural America, we had good programs on the state level, but that those programs weren't integrating well. There was a lot of overlap and confusion between those programs. So Congress decided to create these rural development councils in states across the country. VCRD, there was probably, at its peak, there was probably about 35 rural development councils. There are now under 20, actually, and VCRD, if you look at the rural development councils around the country, VCRD is actually the most thriving of them all. And VCRD has really sort of established a place as a neutral facilitator of conversations, and we do that in a couple of ways. We convene statewide conversations on a variety of topics. Folks might be familiar with sort of the concept of working lands. That came out of conversations facilitated by the VCRD team. Broadband and connectivity was something that that VCRD really focused on about a decade ago. The Council on the Future of Vermont was a big public engagement process VCRD facilitated back in around 2009. So that's sort of one role of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, is to bring together statewide conversations around particular topics. And then the other is that VCRD also has facilitated what are called community visits in nearly 60 communities around the state of Vermont. And to a large degree, the Model Communities program that we're talking about today is really based on those community visits. A community visit is essentially a process, as we'll get into because our process is similar, where a community is brought together to decide on things that they really want to focus on, priorities they want to work on, and then they convene task forces to implement those priorities. And a big part of the success of the community visit model is that we bring a visiting team into the community to help the community really think about where their opportunities are. And those visiting team members then serve as resource team members as the community picks their priorities and moves into implementation. So for the last couple of years, well, nearly 3 years at this point, the Vermont Council on Rural Development, at the direction of our board, has been facilitating a statewide conversation around what we call the climate economy. And we facilitated a couple of statewide summits in Randolph at Vermont Technical College. And then actually in September of this year, we pulled together a big national summit up in Burlington around the climate economy. As part of our facilitation around this, we convened something called the Climate Change Economy Council. And as you can see from this slide, a great list of stakeholders around the table for that Climate Change Economy Council. And they came out with, in early 2016, the Progress for Vermont report that included 7 specific recommended actions. And the creation of the Climate Economy Model Community Program was one of those recommendations that came out of the Progress for Vermont report. So that's really the origin of the Climate Economy Model Communities Program. Now, when we talk about the climate economy, what are we talking about? Many of you may have heard Paul Costello quote Danny Kennedy before. Danny actually came to Vermont to participate in a couple of our summits. And as you can see from this quote, actively addressing climate change. Oh, I've just lost, shoot, something just happened. Okay, I just turned the audio back on. Can folks hear me now? Great, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. So as I was saying, this quote from Dan A. Kennedy, actively addressing climate change is the big economic opportunity of our time. Another way that I've come to think about this is the concept of decoupling. And I think for so long, really since industrialization, when you look at economic growth and the utilization of fossil fuels, those two things are married together, right? When there's economic growth, there is an increase in the utilization of fossil fuels and therefore an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. When there's economic decline, there is a similar drop in the use of fossil fuels. We are at a point in our global economy, or at least in many nations' economies and in many states' economies, where that relationship has been broken. We can have economic growth even while also reducing the use of fossil fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so really that is fundamental to our approach to the climate economy, is that belief that we not only can we continue to have a healthy economy as we also tackle climate change, but in fact it's imperative to do that. Right now, considering 150 plus nations signed on to the Paris Climate Accord, there is the global competition to figure out what are the models going to be that tackle climate change. What are the business models going to be? What are the community models going to be that tackle climate change? And to some degree, Vermont is in that competition, and Vermont communities who decide they really want to embrace that opportunity and think about where can they find a niche in this new climate economy. That's very much what underlies the Climate Economy Model Communities program. We are looking for partners in communities that see that there is real opportunity in tackling climate change and is interested in convening a community conversation to do that. So I think it's also worth thinking about this on the household level. This is some great data put out by Efficiency Vermont about a year and a half ago that shows what is the typical household energy burden in Vermont. Some of you have probably seen this before, but basically that energy burden for an average household is about $5,000, and over half of that energy burden is transportation fuel spending, and then the remainder is split between electricity and thermal. And for the Model Communities program, while we certainly are thinking about the community as a whole and what the community can take on, this program is also very much intended to help homes and businesses think about what their opportunities are in the climate economy space. And finally, if we look at the growth in clean energy jobs statewide, it really has been a shining light in Vermont's economy over the last few years. Every year, the Clean Energy Development Fund puts out this report on clean energy jobs. And frankly, every year I think, boy, we can't continue to have this job growth in the clean energy economy, but yet every year you see about a 4 to 5% increase in clean energy jobs over the last year. So really impressive numbers. That again shows the economic potential in the climate economy. You know, one of the questions is, why is Vermont a great place to take on this conversation and to take this on? And in particular, we as a state really have some great assets to build on in terms of the climate economy. We have a renewable energy standard passed by the legislature in 2015, and as part of that, there's a pioneering program. Some are calling it the Vermont Vermont Energy Innovation Program, also commonly known as Tier 3. But essentially, that requires our utilities to help their customers use less fossil fuels. That's an innovative program in Vermont. In Vermont, we have the smart grid. So many Vermont homes have smart meters now as a result of a big federal grant, $69 million in ERA funding matched by our utilities and coordinated by Belco. Those smart meters give us a real leg up and a real opportunity to do innovative things. We have working lands in Vermont and appreciation of the value of those. We have great utilities in Vermont. We mentioned Green Mountain Power in particular here, but the truth is we have a couple of great co-ops as well, Vermont Electric Co-op and Washington Electric Co-op, along with our great municipal utilities. Certainly want to give a shout out to them since we've got Swanton participating in this webinar as well. In Vermont, we also have something that's pretty unique, which is an energy efficiency utility that with Efficiency Vermont that helps all electric utility customers use less electricity. That's something created in 2000, and it's really pioneering here in Vermont, our energy efficiency utility. We have a comprehensive energy plan that set the goal of achieving 90% renewable energy by 2050. As I mentioned, we have the Burlington Electric Department, Washington Electric Co-op, and Swanton, actually, right? Swanton Municipal Utility, 100% utility, 100% renewable utilities. So anyway, it goes on and on. Vermont has a real strong list of assets to build upon. One thing I want to mention is that the climate economy, while it is tempting sometimes to fall into this language totally focused on renewable energy and energy efficiency, the climate economy is really bigger than that. Certainly it's clean energy development and distribution, it's thermal and electric efficiency in our building and workplaces, it's efficient building construction. It's also very much about transportation and what our transportation system looks like. It's about the working lands. It's about recycling and reuse and renewal of resources. It's about smart growth development and preserving our downtowns. It's about the digital economy and the creative economy. And it's also about outdoor recreation and tourism. And really, when you think about the climate economy, it's embedded throughout the economy. Every business has energy bills. Every home has energy bills. We're all thinking about how to reduce those bills and how to make our circumstances more affordable and our state and our communities more affordable. So in a way, the climate economy really is the entire economy. So now I want to talk a little bit about how the actual model communities process works in the communities that we work in. And I've got a few charts that sort of diagram that. And anyone, as I said, anyone who's participated in VCRD's community visit program will be familiar with this process, because our process for the Model Communities program is very much based upon that. So the first step in this process, and it's actually not step one, it's this first square is called the Kickoff Planning Committee. For the community visit program, we call that the steering committee. That's really an important part in the process. Essentially, what we do as we embark on this program is we do outreach to try to get the right 20 to 25 people around the table to launch this program in the community. And what we are really looking for is a diverse mix of community members that come from all walks of life in the community, that are connected in different ways with different parts of a community to come around the table to get this process started. They do a couple of things at that planning committee meeting. They really tee up the kickoff, right? They set some themes for the kickoff day. They think about logistics for the kickoff day. And as you'll see in the next slide, they work on an entire outreach plan to make sure the full community knows about the kickoff day and knows that they're invited to participate in that conversation. Step one in the sort of community engagement process is the kickoff day. And what the kickoff day is it's a series of forums around a set of themes, and then it also is a community meal where everybody gathers together. And as I mentioned before, we bring in a visiting team of partners in to that conversation. It might be members of the congressional delegation. It might be members from various federal and state agencies. It might be private partners and nonprofits who come in as part of the visiting team to those forums. They are really there to listen to the conversation more than to drive the conversation. And so, in fact, what this represents is an opportunity for a community really to help various partners around the state understand more about what's going on in that community, get more familiar with that community, and really to tee up the opportunity for further work with those partners. Step 2 is another community meeting a month later, and this is where the community, via dot voting, right, we take all of the sort of ideas that were raised at the various forums on the kickoff day, and then we distill that down to about 20 to 25 action ideas. We put those on the wall, and with dot voting, the community comes together to select 3 to 5 priorities that they want to work on as part of the climate economy program. And at the end of that meeting, people actually sign up to serve on those task forces because the idea for this program is it's not what you want somebody else to do for your community, it's what you want to take on for your community. What are you interested in working on to make your community better? And then the final community convening step as part of this process is what I'm calling the task force launch. And essentially that's where we convene the new task forces to work on the priorities. Again, we bring a resource team into that conversation, and they provide some advice and technical assistance at that meeting, and they also help those task forces to identify potential resources that are going to be helpful in getting their work done. So I mentioned that outreach is really important as part of this program and as getting this program started. I wanted to just quickly share with you, this was the outreach plan we had in Middlebury leading up to the kickoff that happened in September. As you see, we're working across multiple channels to make sure the entire community knows about these community meetings, because what we know is participation is really important as part of achieving success for these programs. So we're doing targeted outreach to various organizations in the community, social media, direct phone calls, a mailing, and I should mention as part of this program, this is one of the expectations on the community that's participating, is we ask that the community support a mailing to all residents in the community. We do a posting of flyers. We do handout of flyers through the school, through the library, through stores in town, and then we do media outreach. All of that trying to make sure everybody in the community knows about the kickoff. Here's another sort of chart that is a diagram of how the process works. And essentially, we like to think of it as a funnel. You go from the kickoff team setting the themes for the conversation, and they might set 6 or 9 themes for the forums on the kickoff day. And then at the kickoff day, it's really a series of brainstorming sessions. And community members come together and throw out ideas for how they want to utilize this program and where they see for opportunities to improve the community. So you get a bunch of ideas that come out of that kickoff. Those are distilled down to about 20 to 25 action ideas, and then the community meeting where the community comes together to select priorities. They do that through dot voting, and they decide what are the 3 to 5 initiatives that we really want to focus on, and then you break into task forces to do the action planning and resource identification, which is important in achieving those priorities. And finally, one more process chart. Sorry, it's a lot of them here, but the one distinction I really want to draw your attention to for the Model Communities program is that, as I mentioned before, we very much want to think about what are the opportunities for homes and business as part of this program. And so as you can see, while we are facilitating a conversation about what are the community initiatives and doing dot voting to pick 3 to 5 priorities for community initiatives that the community wants to take on, there's also, as this orange track shows, a parallel conversation happening on how homes and businesses can take advantage of various efficiency and renewable energy and energy transformation opportunities. So essentially, the question to a community is not if you want to take on energy efficiency and renewable energy for homes and businesses, but instead, how do you want to do that? And I haven't mentioned yet, but a key partner in this program for us is Efficiency Vermont, who is at the table with us as we have those conversations, and in fact, really works with the community as they think about home and business efficiency opportunities. We also very much work with Green Mountain Power or other utilities, depending on what service territory we're in, to think about what are those opportunities for homes and businesses in terms of energy efficiency. Maybe it's thermal efficiency, maybe it's electric efficiency. It might be a program focused on rooftop solar, or it might be energy transformation, right? We think about heat pumps as a way to go from using fuel oil to electricity. We think about transportation and electric vehicles. So there is a parallel track, a parallel conversation going on in the community about what are the opportunities for homes and businesses. And that a task force sort of comes together around that effort. As you'll see when we look at the work that we've done in Middlebury, a task force comes together to really focus on that, on those opportunities, and to develop plans for doing that with partners like Efficiency Vermont and the electric utility and others. So I want to just give a quick review of Middlebury and Pownal, the communities we've worked with in 2017, because I think it can be helpful in showing where this program can lead and how it's worked in the two communities we've worked in so far. So in Pownal, the planning committee decided to name that process Empower Pownal. And I see, by the way, a couple of questions here. Yeah, we will post this, the PowerPoint presentation. I will post that online this afternoon. I'm also recording this, and so I will also figure out a way to post this webinar as well, and we'll make sure that's available to folks who aren't able to be a part of today's conversation. So in Pownal, we really organized in May through August. We started in May. You can see the picture here with the planning committee. Then we went to the kickoff, then the prioritization meeting, and the task force meetings. And as you can see, we had about 100 people participate in the kickoff. We had about 120 people come out to the community meeting at the American Legion where they decided on priorities. And then we had about 45 people come out to join task forces as part of that process. So here are the priorities that Pownal decided to focus on as part of that process. They decided to really focus on a network of farms and food producers because that's really a place where they see economic activity in that community. They also decided to focus on trails and the river as ways to provide outdoor recreation opportunities. They want to reduce barriers to starting and growing a business and agriculture in the community, and combine that with growing jobs in Pownal through business incubation and the redevelopment of underutilized properties. And then finally, they built a community-wide green-up process in Pownal to address roadside litter and illegal dumping. And as you can see, there's a couple of news stories here that show that those task forces have gotten right to work. They had a recent cleanup event at a particular location in town. They had 30-plus volunteers clean up, I think, nearly 4 tons of garbage from a particular site in town. They've organized a business group in the community, and they actually, there's a little snapshot of a website. The Recreation Committee has set up an excellent website. They are looking at a particular property, town property, where the wastewater treatment facility is, and they see real opportunities to turn that property into a park and walking path. And then also, there's an owner of a property in town that's looking to redevelop that property. You can see that in this old picture of this gas station. That is owned by a particular gentleman who wants to redevelop that site and is working with the Empower Pownal Economic Development Task Force to think about what are the best ways to do that will also provide a community gathering spot there in Pownal. So on to Middlebury. Middlebury, we started organizing in Middlebury in August, and they just had their meeting of their task forces in November. And as you will see, Middlebury is focused on advancing public transportation, facilitating rideshare, and making the community a great place for biking and walking. Middlebury is thinking about how to help farmers transition to organic and regenerative practices. As you know, Addison County is a real hub of agricultural activity here in the state. Not only that, but Middlebury is a hub of value-added agriculture, right? There's all of this activity on Exchange Street there, and you know, whether it's cider, whether it's cheese, whether it's other value-added food production going on in that community, so they see a real opportunity around that. And then, as I mentioned, Middlebury is working to advance energy efficiency and renewable energy opportunities for homes, businesses, and buildings. And then finally, I skipped one, which is Middlebury, the community wants to think about how are they increasing staff capacity at the local and regional level to support the work of this effort in an ongoing way. So they're thinking about how do they grow the capacity to do this work. They have a great energy committee in Middlebury, another great one in Weybridge, but they're thinking about how do they move beyond just having volunteer-led energy committees to act more cohesively to really move the ball forward in some of these areas. You know, I'll give you just a little example of how this work is going in Middlebury. The committee that is focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy opportunities. It's got a great local chair, a gentleman named Chris Huston, who is an architect there at Breadloaf in Middlebury. He has stepped forward to lead that committee. And most recently, a couple of weeks ago, that task force met again. And I'll just give you a sense of who was around the table. We had about 10 to 15 local citizens who were really eager to work on energy efficiency for homes and businesses in town. We had Green Mountain Power, we had Efficiency Vermont around the table, we had NeighborWorks of Western Vermont, we had Sun Common there, and we actually had, because there's someone local in Middlebury who works for Tesla, there was someone from Tesla around the table as well. So all of those partners were there. Oh, and Vermont Gas as well, because they now have an efficiency utility that's working in the Addison County area as well. All of those partners rolling up their sleeves, working with these local leaders to think about how do we take energy efficiency to the next level in this community. And what Middlebury has decided they want to focus on is they're going to pick one neighborhood in town and really try to do comprehensive retrofits in that neighborhood. That's what they've decided to focus on through this effort, or at least that's one of the things they've decided they want to focus on. And they've got some great partners ready to work with them to really figure out how they get more homes and businesses in the community participating in these opportunities around energy transformation and energy efficiency. So that just gives you a flavor of what comes out of this as these task forces begin doing their work. I want to now transition to a little bit of a talk about the application process for a community. Most of this information is in the RFP, so it won't be new to you all, but I do just want to describe that quickly for you all. So as we've noted, at this point, eligibility for communities is ranging from about 1,000 to 15,000 in population. The municipality itself does not need to be the lead on the application, but we do want to know that municipalities support this effort. They can do that through a letter of support from the select board. They can do that in some other way, but we do want to know that a select board is interested in participating in this program. That's an important part, an important demonstration for us that we are being invited into the community by the elected leaders of that community. And then this question about whether or not more than one town can gather together to submit a joint application. Actually, I should have mentioned this with Middlebury. You know, Middlebury as a community was the applicant for that community. But when that steering committee, that planning committee in Middlebury came together, they decided that they wanted to be inclusive of the surrounding towns in the community. So they named it the Greater Middlebury Climate Economy Initiative as a way to signal to other surrounding towns that they were invited into that process to participate. Makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about a community like Middlebury, because they are a hub and there is such a symbiotic relationship between Middlebury and the surrounding towns. So in fact, as Middlebury thinks about how they want to move the conversation forward, they are thinking about how are they doing that in more of a regional way, as opposed to just within the borders of the town of Middlebury itself. I say that because that in some way informs our thinking about whether or not multiple towns can join together in an application. I would say we are open to that, to having multiple towns submit an application together. But what we're going to want to see is some demonstration that there is that those communities have worked together in the past, or have some jurisdiction, some common jurisdiction, or have been able to work together. It's important for members of a community to know that this is a conversation for them to participate in. And so if you make the conversation too broad, then to some degree people are not drawn into it in the same way. I always think about Vermonters being really identified with their town and less identified with their county, right? We think of ourselves as Vermonters, and we think of ourselves as residents of Montpelier or Brattleboro or wherever we live. And then maybe as a tertiary, we think of maybe that we live in, Windham County or something like that. So that's part of why we think it's important for this to be a town-based conversation, but we are open if towns want to come together to submit an application. So just to remind folks of what the application process is, applications are due next Monday, December 18th. We will do an initial review of those applications. We will then narrow down to somewhere between 3 and 5 finalists, and then we want to do a community sort of interview as part of this process before we make a final decision. And that's really an opportunity for us to come sit down with folks, answer any questions you may have about the program, and really sort of verify that you've got a nice broad-based group of people that are interested in engaging in this program. And then finally, we'll do a final review around the end of January and make a final decision by January 19th. The components of the application, as you've seen in the RFP, there's the designation of the project lead, so who's the lead on the application, who is the town representative, who's going to be around the table, maybe a business leader, and other possible steering committee members. Then a narrative that's up to 3 pages in length, 3 letters of support that go along with this. We've tried to keep it a pretty manageable application, and I would say a key is using that designation of potential steering committee members or planning committee members as a way to show that you've got broad-based interest in having this program in the community. And also use the letters of support for that same purpose. How can you demonstrate that there is sort of a diverse group of people locally who want this conversation to happen and really see opportunity in this conversation? The criteria that we will use in reviewing the application: does the application demonstrate an understanding of the existing challenges and emerging opportunities in the community that this program could address, and a vision for where this process may lead? Is there a diverse cross-section of the community supporting this process? And does the application demonstrate an appreciation for how a focus on the climate economy can benefit low and middle income members of the community? And I want to draw particular attention to that. We really feel like the success of this program is in part dependent on our ability to sort of get outside of the usual suspects. I worry sometimes, and some of you have heard me say this before, I worry that when people hear the term climate economy, they think, oh, that's for those people who can afford to put solar on the rooftops and have a Tesla in their garage. And I think it's imperative that this program reach into all socioeconomic parts of a community, and it's about increasing quality of life for everybody in town. And so we want, as part of an application, some sense both of how could this program serve all members of a community, and also how do you draw a diverse group of people into the conversation. That's going to be one way that we review applications as well. Finally, as we look ahead to 2018, this just gives a timeline for how we will work in 2 communities. As I've mentioned, we're selecting 2 communities to work in 2018. We will do that sort of sequentially, where we will work in the first community, sort of really getting started in February. After we make that selection in late January, we'll get started in February, aiming for a kickoff in March, community meeting in April, and then the task force meetings in May. And actually, something that I haven't mentioned is we consider our commitment to the community to be a year-long commitment. So for that first community, if we start work in February with the planning committee, that means we are going to be working with that community. And really, I, as the program director, am going to be working in that community for a full year on into February of 2019, because we have, as part of this program, we really want to work with the community on the implementation piece. Some of the projects that can emerge are complicated, and they take time, they take resources, they take partners. We really view VCRD as having a partnership with you as you shift into implementation phase once the task forces begin doing their work. The second community we will begin working in over the summer with the planning committee in July, and then on through the summer and into the fall with the second community, and then implementation wrapping into 2019 on into June of 2019 in terms of the length of the engagement for Vermont Council on Rural Development. So I am finally here, I'm sure you're relieved to know, at the final slide. As you can see here, my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions now and open it up for questions, but also very much would welcome direct email questions to me or phone calls. Really, I'm available to you as you consider this program and whether or not it might be a good fit for your community. All right, any questions? Can I be helpful as we wrap this up here? Jeff, I don't think there's a way for me to provide audio back to you. I think it's really via the chat function. So if you don't mind typing in questions, that's the easiest way at this point, or perhaps the only way, I should say. Any questions for me? That's a good question. Jeff has asked, how might this interact with the town planning process? In 2 ways. First, I think when a community is taking on a town planning process, and many communities under Act 174 are also doing enhanced energy planning as part of that town planning process, we always want to be careful when we are embarking on one of VCRD's community programs to be sure to be clear with the community that those are separate programs. In other words, while we do a lot of public engagement, it's really to identify 2 or 3 priorities that the community wants to take on. And it is not an exercise to develop a town plan for the community. That isn't to say that there isn't some natural sort of overlap between those conversations, because of course, as a community is thinking about its town planning process, you're thinking about what initiatives you want to take on moving forward. But we do find that it's important to be clear that what this process is not about developing sort of a town plan, but instead about developing a few community priorities that the community wants to take on, and then recruiting local leaders into that conversation to help run those task forces, and recruiting local participation in those task forces. You know, could it enhance the town plan process? I think if a planning commission a planning commission might be interested to see what emerges as community priorities, but I do think it's important to for people to understand that they really are distinct. That this is about identifying priorities that people want to work on right away, and that the town planning process is about an overall sort of guidance document for the community to develop their zoning bylaws from, and to think about their sort of community priorities. I see Henry with a similar question, sort of about the town plan, and I would say it is absolutely this new group can take on those goals. But what I think is important for us is that we come to the community with virtually a blank slate. Other than the theme of the climate economy, it's really important as a neutral facilitator that folks know that they have an opportunity to pick priorities that are important to them. So while a town plan may be a helpful and informative document as a task force begins doing its work, what I would caution against is thinking that whatever the initiatives that are identified by a community will simply be a derivation of what's in the town plan. It's really important for us that the community feels like that they have full latitude in terms of where they go with this program. It's pretty likely that there's going to be alignment there between what the community decides they want to focus on through our Model Communities program and what's in the town plan. But I don't want to say that those two things would work in lockstep, because I think that could potentially confuse things in terms of citizen participation and really understanding the role of this process. Any other? Oh, I see another question coming in. I see Jeff. I don't think Jeff Ford has asked the question of whether or not, if a town's in the middle of updating a town plan, could that be a problem? I think the answer to that is no, but I think it's important to communicate clearly about that to constituents so they don't get confused if those conversations are happening in parallel. It's important to be really clear about sort of what the town planning process is and where that conversation is happening and where there might be hearings for that, and then to help people understand that the Model Communities program is its own process to identify priorities that the community wants to take on. We actually had that happen in Pownal. The Planning Commission in Pownal was very much in the midst of rewriting that town plan, and we just had to be clear with people that this was not a planning exercise, the Model Communities program. It was a distinct process going on in the community. Other questions? Jeff's asked if there's any flexibility in terms of submitting an application. At this point, we could have a sidebar, but no, I really, I think, to be fair, I've got to hold on to December 18th as a deadline for applications. I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation, and we, as I say, we really have a partnership with Efficiency Vermont, and our utilities in this program, so I would need to consult with them if we were going to change that RFP process. Happy to talk offline about that possibility, but at this point I would say